Good morning, good afternoon to some. We'll get started here in a couple minutes as we get people to file into the Zoom room. Maybe not a couple minutes, we'll give it a couple seconds. But we'll get started now just so we can make sure we maximize our time together. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. My name is Trey Jones. I serve as Regional Director for Positive Coaching Alliance in the state of Texas. You are joining our Beyond the Offer conversation that is co-presented with Athletes to Athletes. And so we're happy to have you here. And certainly we're grateful for your interest in this very important conversation. Certainly a very privileged, blessed conversation, but important nonetheless. For those that are not familiar with what PCA or who PCA is a national nonprofit that believes that youth sports is an amazing way to teach kids life lessons. It's our hope to create an environment that allows them to be the best version of themselves, but also have joy through their competition. And so we work with others to make sure that becomes closer to a reality for more people. And so that's what we're here to do. Certainly the reason to have this conversation, we know that the moving target of collegiate athletics and recruiting moves day to day. It changes very quickly. We know a lot of people, there's lots of information. And so we certainly are not the gospel. We know that a lot of these rules are going to change and have changed, but it's important for us to have a level of consciousness when we're helping support our kids, or as if you are an athlete, helping support yourself to make that right decision, or even as a coach, how are you supporting your athlete to find the right place for them to hopefully get a chance to extend their athletic career. Certainly the structure of this conversation and what you can expect to hear from us. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. We'll be focused in on 3 specific topics today. We'll be talking about, kind of the common myths in kind of the college recruiting process, the importance of environment and culture when you are selecting a place for your child or your athlete or for yourself to extend that opportunity to play and compete. And lastly, the importance of mental health as we seek to go into those spaces. Lastly, before I introduce you to our esteemed panel, I think it's important to acknowledge that each situation is unique. Each person's perspective is going to be unique. And I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge that on the front side. There are going to be those that potentially have the blessing of having a stronger financial backing in your family. And so then that changes your perspective from someone that maybe doesn't. Certainly there are those that are on the professional level, or at least on that professional spectrum. Doesn't mean that you can't be, but there is a difference between an athlete that is a 5-star going to a Power 5 in a revenue generating sport, and someone that's looking to walk on and extend their experience. Doesn't devalue either of those people, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that reality is different, and so we want to make sure that that's something we say on the front side. And then lastly, making sure that we recognize that certain athletes get multiple offers, and so sometimes the reality is that gives you a little bit more selective power when you have those types of options. And so it doesn't mean that you only have one offer, then you've got to take it or leave it and just deal with what that reality is. But we do recognize that is a stress and a perspective that does get brought to this conversation. So it's important to acknowledge that on the front side. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our panel. First, starting with Mr. Reed Meyer, excuse me. Reed is the co-founder and the CEO of Athletes to Athletes. It's an advising company that helps high school athletes, student athletes find their best college fit. Reed is a former college baseball player competing at both Texas Tech University as well as Weatherford College. Reed, thank you for being here. And Reed also, like I said, we are co-presenting in this conversation with his company, Athletes to Athletes. So Reed, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Trent. Thanks so much for having us. It's an absolute blast.
Absolutely. Next, we have Miss Kenesha Liu. Kenesha is a She swam for UCLA. She is a program record holder. She's a two-time All-American. She was ranked 75th in the world in 2019 when she was with UCLA, and currently, after graduating, she is currently working at a startup in Santa Clara as a marketing specialist. Kanisha, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for this conversation.
Absolutely. And then lastly, and certainly not least, we have Mr. Trey Robinson and his perspective as a parent. Trey is the parent of currently three young people, but specifically two. One in which is going to go to college without participating in athletics, and another that's looking to figure out a way to navigate that experience for him, and Trey's perspective of supporting his children through that, the different experiences, but certainly looking to find a healthy landing point for all of them. Is an important perspective and voice that we'd like to offer. And Trey, we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Trinus. Thanks for having me. Super excited.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Well, like I said, we're going to, hopefully there's less of me and more of them having that conversation. So I'll offer up an initial conversation kind of in that light. But the first question will be to Reed, if you don't mind, certainly as the co-founder of Athletes to Athletes, if you don't mind telling us just the impetus of why you wanted to create an organization like Athletes to Athlete, what it seeks to do, and then also as a backup, preliminary backup to that, what are some of the myths and legends that you have both experienced but also come across, your desk as an athlete, but also as a person and a business owner that's looking to support athletes?
Absolutely, yeah. So Athletes to Athletes was formed actually out of my own personal experience as a college athlete. And through my recruiting process in high school, I was somebody who was moderately recruited in high school. I was very fortunate to have, backing of my family. I was able to go and travel to certain showcases and explore a lot of different options as far as different schools were concerned. And for all intents and purposes, I should have really been able to navigate that really effectively with the backing and the resources that I had to do so. And I didn't. It was a very reactive process for me. I ended up making my decision based entirely on athletics. And when I got to my first school, Texas Tech University, my only concern was signing a scholarship with the biggest school I possibly could. It was a Big 12 program. Grew up in Texas. It had a lot of name brand likeness to me. And when I got there, I realized that, I wasn't prepared to live in Lubbock, Texas, 5 hours away from my family. I wasn't prepared to be in a college major that I didn't know was my major until I showed up to campus, because I hadn't done any forethought on what that might be. That experience was really shell-shocking for me. And then on the athletic side as well, I went from being the guy in my little private school to being a guy in this Big 12, nationally pooling school. And so for me, it was really kind of a shell-shocking experience, which resulted in me going to actually 4 different schools in 4 years and quitting my sport halfway through my college career, which was my identity for the first 16 years of my life when I was playing. So for me, it really felt like I was caught off guard by that process. And as I started to sort of work through that process myself internally, I started reaching out to other kids that I played with or I knew who played, and literally gathered up hundreds of other college athletes who had similar experiences, maybe not to the extent that I did, but having this feeling like they were reactive in this process. And when they got to a school, there was this thinking of, oh man, if I would have known this, or if I would have done this, maybe my decision would have been different. And so from that, we built out the program that is Athletes to Athletes, with the sole mission of educating and empowering high school student athletes to better prepare themselves for that next step. We want that decision to be a holistic one and not just based in athletics, because as much as we all love being athletes and we want to compete for as long as we can, the harsh reality is your sport is only about 20 to maybe 25% of your entire college experience. So you can't make 100% of your college choice on what is going to be 20 to 25% of your college experience. And so that's where we like to come in. We like to try and help fill that gap and help kids understand what that next step looks like and better prepare them to be proactive in that process. To address your second question about common myths, I think, this one is kind of tip of the iceberg here and top off, but, I think it's important to understand that athletic scholarships, as wonderful as they might be, are not necessarily what you would expect them to be based on what you hear in media and things like that. There are exactly 6 sports in Division I that are what we call head count sports. So all or nothing scholarships that you're probably, if you hear about it in movies or in media, or because we talk about football and men's basketball so much on TV, when you hear scholarship, it has a different meaning to it. Everything else is what is called an equivalency sport. And these schools have percentages of scholarship money to hand out to a much larger swath of kids, and they've got to figure out a way to make that money work. So for example, baseball, you have 11.7 scholarships to distribute amongst 27 kids on a 35-man roster at Division I. Those numbers don't add up. So you've got to find a way for us, and we really encourage our kids to, if you want to find ways to sort of support that scholarship drive, merit aid, academic aid, financial aid, there's tons of other ways where you can create a package that makes college affordable and makes college make sense. But to sit back and rest on just athletic laurels for 95% of kids is not the best way to go about finding that for perfect package.
That's powerful. Yeah, no, it is. And it's, again, what are you getting yourself into, and are you aware of those things? Kanisha, as an athlete yourself, were there things that immediately kind of popped in your mind? You're like, hold on, this doesn't vibe with what I thought it was going to be when when I was in high school.
Yeah. And one of the things that like drew me to like athletes was like hearing Reed's story and just like realizing how much I resonated with what he had to say. Like I had the fortune of getting to choose out of amazing schools where I wanted to go. And, like going to UCLA is anybody's dream. But I think looking back, there were some things that I wish I knew then that I know now. Like I think a lot of the things that I was thinking about was like scholarship money. I was thinking about like athletics, and I was thinking about like, I guess like the way it looked, because like when people, it's weird to me, like people are very invested in where you want to go, which is amazing and super exciting. But like, as a high schooler, like psychologically, it's kind of strange knowing like this decision is going to be published here. Everybody's going to know about it. Like I was thinking about like, what does this say about me if I choose to go to this school versus this school? And I think that kind of, it had a big impact in where I decided to go. I was like, okay, on paper, UCLA is going to look amazing. And like, I had the good fortune that even though like, I really didn't choose it based off of, like some things that are really important, like fitting in culture, like I was still able to have an amazing time and I enjoyed a great career. So I got very, very fortunate, but like, I worry because like, I'll look at these publications and I'll see like, it's even in the title, like my title was like something like world junior finalist commits to UCLA, or like, but then you'll compare it to other people and you'll be like thinking about like, how is this going to look to other people? And it can be very stressful. So I think it's really important that like to mitigate the noise, as hard as that is, as a high schooler, like you don't really think about like it being a bad thing. You don't really think about the effects it is until, like I'm like an adult now. Looking back, I'm like, oh, like that is why I did what I did. But like, I think it's very important to be aware of like the smaller things that are going to make a big impact, like fitting into the team, the culture, the school, your major. Didn't think about a major for me, which is, like to any other college kid, you're like, how did you not think about a major? And my honest answer was like, I don't know, wasn't a priority for me.
I respect that. Yes. Now, were you conscious of that when you were like, did you feel the social, stress in wanting kind of that affirmation, or was it just something you knew you were reacting to, but you didn't really know why you were reacting to it that way?
Yeah. I think one of the joys of growing up is being able to look back at some of your decisions, as cringeworthy as it can be. It's also like wonderful to be like, wow, like this was why I did those things. So like at the time, I really did not realize how much I was thinking about that. I chose a lot of the schools that I was looking at besides UCLA because of I knew my parents would love that school. They would be like, so proud to be like, oh, my daughter's looking at, Harvard or whatever. it wasn't for me. And at the end of the day, like, they're not the ones who are going to be going to those classes, they're not going to be the ones who are going to be like interacting with those people. So it's important for you yourself to know your like where you want to go based off of like the things that are going to be really important to you. So yeah, like to answer your question, at the time I had no idea. All I knew was like my name's going to be in a headline, like
Hey, look, all of us like to be in lights, so there's nothing wrong with that.
right.
Trey, is you're supporting your boys through this process, or specifically your one son that is kind of in that current recruiting space? How have you navigated kind of the, you see the emotional intelligence as their dad, but how have you managed kind of that conversation, or some of the stressors that's presenting in your own house?
So, I mean, obviously we're still learning. There's a lot to learn in this process, and that's why I think it's so important to surround yourself with people that know and can help you navigate. But as a parent, it's for us, it's been trying to get outside of the sport and really talk to them as a human. What do you like? What do you want? What are you trying to see? What sounds fun? And it's hard to get a high school boy to articulate that. So we've done a lot of, would you rather do this or rather do that? Would you rather do this or you rather do that? Trying to get them to open up, and also asking those questions in a way to introduce things that maybe they hadn't even thought of, in terms of things that should be in their selection criteria, that just at their age, they just aren't even looking far enough out to think about, like major or pastime or air temperature, right? Like do you like this heat? You like the cold? Like they don't even think about stuff like that. So just trying to help them articulate maybe what's important, or what they've got in their mind, so that you can then turn around and apply that to their selection process.
I love that. That's one of the things that we even talk about with 4 or 5-year-olds, right? Like resisting the urge to fix it is a big deal, right? And so though maybe we're closer to the appropriate answer, but how can we like ask more questions of our children to make sure that maybe they're starting to kind of navigate that in their own mental space, and maybe they tell you something that you didn't know that they felt, because you've asked the right type of question. And so, how do we make sure that we're not, domineering, I guess, kind of in that space to where it potentially leads to something that's unhealthy because we didn't ask enough questions. So, kudos to you on at least having enough consciousness to ask that right type of question as a parent. Reed, are there other, again, myths, around, people, we see Instagram and we see, everybody has like a signing ceremony right now, whether or not you are a recruited walk-on or preferred walk-on, maybe just going to try out versus full ride, right? Like how have kind of that the public aspect of signing, how has that started to kind of influence people's decisions and how they project those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shoot, we could spend a whole panel on that, to be honest with you. But I think the biggest one there to kind of identify and differentiate is, a verbal offer versus a signed national letter of intent. That's, I think, where you kind of hit the biggest difference in how you determine those types of things. Verbal offer is exactly what it sounds like. It is a school verbally expressing their interest, wanting to offer you a scholarship or offer you a space on a team, which should never be diminished. It's an amazing accomplishment to have that interest from a school, regardless of where it is, regardless of what division, conference, anything like that. The ability to have an interest from a coach to play at the next level is something you should celebrate and be excited about. And I think that, kids being able to do that and share with folks is something that I personally enjoy. I mean, you should be able to celebrate your accomplishments, celebrate the things that you're excited about. And I think it's wonderful. We caution the kids that we speak with, about the fact that verbal offers are exactly what they are, verbal offers. It's the same thing as someone telling you they can't, hey, we should get dinner sometime, really excited about it, really want to do that. Until that sucker's on the calendar and everybody's got a confirmation, it's a hope and a dream and a want. And so that national letter of intent, that signed agreement, that is what really locks you into a school and makes that what it is. And occasionally, depending on what the school is, prestige, size, insert thing here, a lot of times verbal offers can even be used as a bit of a leverage tactic or a mitigating factor, because a lot of times when kids get these verbal offers, they sort of buy into that program and they buy into that team. Hey, I'm going to be XYZ. And they might do that as early as sophomore year in some cases. Well, now you're verbally committed to this school. If you're speaking with another school and they ask you what's going on and you tell them, hey, I'm verbally committed to here, they're probably going to go find somebody else to recruit, because why try to pull you away from a team that you're excited about, that you have a verbal offer for, then go find somebody else who maybe is uncommitted, and it's a little easier to have that conversation and find that mutual interest. Well, if senior year rolls around and all of a sudden there's somebody who sits higher up than you on the recruiting task board, now all of a sudden that verbal commitment becomes a, man, we really wish we could, but this person's going to fill in that slot. And now you are left wanting. A similar situation actually happened to me when I was going through the high school process. Ivy Leagues do not have national letter of intents, but I had a long conversation and a long relationship with Dartmouth, and was under the impression that I was going to go to Dartmouth. I had verbally committed there, had an understanding with the recruiting coordinator that was going to be where I wanted to go. August of my senior year rolls around, and all of a sudden the grades that were okay in May of my junior year now all of a sudden aren't going to be able to cut it in August of my senior year. And so I effectively had to restart my recruiting process fall of my senior year, decommit of sorts from verbally from Dartmouth, and go through that process in what I felt like was a very expedited fashion. And it did cut off a lot of opportunities for me to maybe explore different opportunities, different options, ask more questions about things. So it's certainly something that can happen, and we just like to make kids aware of that. I mean, it can be a leverage point for a lot of schools. And so as awesome as it is, you got to really make sure you want to commit to that school at a certain level from a verbal commitment standpoint, because you really sometimes can be cutting off a lot of different options or opportunities.
Have you seen kind of the grayness of that decision, right? Or even the offer piece be different in some of the revenue generating, big, the Power Five on the TV sports versus, those that are equally important, but maybe don't have as many eyeballs on them?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think in revenue generating sports, especially men's and women's basketball and football, those the verbal commitment world is a little bit different. I think, you've got these kids that have all these offers potentially, they do the hat ceremonies and all different things like that. And so I do think that's become more of a media play even as well. And so that's become part of the culture of those sports, having multiple offers, keeping those options open. And we're talking about, these top tier kids that are going to get all these choices. I think that situation applies to such a small percentage of student athletes versus the rest of the kids who are just trying to find a place to play and find the right fit. And so it is interesting how, the top 2% of college athletes, these blue chip, guys and girls, take up 95% of sort of the brain space of when we talk about college athletics, which again, I think jades us from what that process really looks like. So I think it's a different world a little bit in that place. I think as you move down, that verbal offer becomes more powerful and can hold more leverage over kids. And to be honest with you, the biggest difference I see is between men's and women's sports. Women, because physiologically they tend to mature quicker than boys, and because Title IX is getting better, but maybe not always where we want it to be in some of these communication and recruiting patterns, you've got gymnasts, you've got, in Kenesha, I don't know if you have anybody that you can think of on your side, but I mean, 8th grade, 9th grade, they're verbally committing to these schools and they're locked in effectively for those 4 years, or having to at least tell coaches when they go to meets or competitions, whatever it might be, that they're committed to this school. You're 14 years old, man. Like, what? That's a big decision to make at 14. And they get pressured into this idea, from a family standpoint and a kid standpoint of like, well, this is what we do. This is the culture of the sport. This is how this is supposed to work. And so as a kid or as a parent, when you sit there and go, oh, shoot, well, if I don't let my kid do this, then am I letting them fall behind in athletics? And that's a tough thing to grapple, especially, from a kid perspective, you're seeing people around you potentially have that. And from a parent perspective, are you making the right decision by letting this happen? Are you making the right decision by, giving your kid an opportunity to explore more things? Are you closing that door? It's a tough thing to juggle.
Yeah, no, it's a very unique experience, but yeah, it's powerful. As we move kind of from that myths and legends conversation to kind of the larger conversation around culture and environment, Kenesha, as a young woman, how intentional were you with like thinking about? I mean, it's almost a two-part question, right? Because there's the getting the support as a female athlete as you deserve, but also as kind of an individual sport participating in. You want to be part of that larger team, but still your times in the water, your times in the water, right? Like there's no one there necessarily, helping you out when you're there with yourself. So how did you manage kind of the cultural aspect of where you wanted to be in college?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think going into college, I didn't really think too much about culture really. I don't really think that, I think I just kind of assumed that every culture was kind of the same, or like, it was strange to me even thinking that like a college wouldn't have a good culture. So that wasn't even one of the questions that I would ask about on recruiting trips. And it's also interesting because like, when you're doing recruiting trips, you're putting your best foot forward. So it's almost like, I mean, it's not a facade, but like everything is like shiny and new and perfect. Everybody's like, okay, like they're coming, like get the set ready, kind of almost kind of thing. So I think going in, it was really hard for me to, I don't know, I guess I just wasn't thinking about that. And the like peeling back the curtain almost and doing the recruiting trips for other people was very interesting to me. Like I didn't really think about like, all of the planning that it goes into getting all of these people in. And I think it was kind of jarring for me to realize like kind of what a production it is. So I think like I loved what Trey was saying about like asking his kids the right question, even things about like the weather, like that's important. And like getting like, making sure your kid knows like, when you're there, like you need to have a good support system because it's hard being a student athlete. So I think one of the like things that you should be ready for is like figuring out like what are the resources that are there for me at UCLA, at Harvard, wherever you're ending up going. That is a good question to ask. And like you can't really shy away. You can't make up some pretty story about resources. Like it's either you have it or you don't. So I think that's a really good question to ask if you're in the recruiting process. And for me, like UCLA had like great resources for like physical therapy, like, mental health therapy in that sense. And like having your coach, like talking about things with your coach on that, like getting their stance on like, because sports culture is a funny thing in the sense that we're a lot of times pushed to just like, we're told to just push, even if it's hard, it's actually almost commendable if you push through something that is like super duper hard. And so it's important to get, an idea of where your teammates, your future teammates, where your coaches are going to stand on like, if I need resources, where is that? Where will I be? Where are you going to be able to like take me? All of those things are really important. So I think as a parent, as a coach, as a student athlete, I think that's one of the things that you can look out for. Yeah.
And even to piggyback that, right? I feel like the use of the term culture has become a bit of a cliche, right? It doesn't mean that it's unimportant, but it's been overused to a point so it starts to lose a little bit of its power. And sometimes these, whether it be mental health services or recovery services or any of these other things, sometimes are used as kind of carrots to recruit people. And sometimes the head coaches aren't really here for any of it. They just know that needs to be part of the package. And so the question becomes how supportive and how much is my head coach or the person that's in charge of this program and allow me to utilize this tool, even though it was kind of it was used as a carrot when I was, not yet signed. But when I'm here, it's like, now it's like, well, you got to go talk to the mental health person. And it's like, well, that didn't sound like, that's not how you described it when I was here on my recruiting visit, right? Like it's one of those things where it still kind of has that old world mentality oftentimes. So yeah, I hear you there.
No, that's very true. And like, it's like interesting because like I've had experiences where like I'm talking to the coach and like they're selling me all of these things. It sounds amazing. And like you can only pick one school. So sometimes like I'll call them and, you have to say like, I'm choosing to go somewhere else. And then like, I've had an experience where the coach is like, suddenly like, why did you call me? Like, I'd rather have an email. Like, this is just like such a, like, I really wish that I didn't waste time on you. Like people, people can be good actors sometimes, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking. So like, I think the point that you made where it's like sometimes you have resources but the coach is not aligned with that, that is important to know. That is something to ask like the team, because obviously the coach isn't going to be like, yeah, we've got resources but we're not like we're not actually going to give them to you. So that's something that you should ask the team about, and like really listen to what they have to say. Sometimes they're told like put your best foot forward, like all of these things. But in my experience, me and my teammates are always honest with any questions that people had, because like you want to have a good fit with the people that that are coming in. So yeah, that's something to be aware of.
No doubt. Trey, as you think of kind of pie in the sky of where you would want your son to land, or just specifically what type of culture do you feel like he would be best served in being within, right? Like, have you thought through kind of what that looks like, or can you describe that?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great question. And to your point, culture means so many different things to different people. In the business world, we call it strategy. Like, who knows what that term really means? But I think it's different for every kid. So we've got 3 boys, and their personalities are as far apart as you can imagine. And so trying to have the conversation with each of them about what's important and what do you want to get out of this experience, and what, and also knowing them and where are they most comfortable. My middle one, who is the one who's trying to play, could have a conversation with a wall. He's just always comfortable in a conversation. And so I'm not as worried about him being across the country in a place that's newer, versus my older one, he's a little bit more reserved. And so finding a place that he can fit in, he can plug in, and he can be part of, he's got some onboarding resources, I think make a big difference. And so for us, it's just been a little bit about trying to knowing the kid, and then trying to understand the place that they're going, and how much support are they going to get, how close are they going to be, how much are you going to be able to support them from a distance versus how much are they going to be totally on their own, is some of the things we're balancing. I mean, there's always the athletic and financial side of it, but bringing in their personality, and then kind of the academic environment, big, little, class size, those types of things, just trying to make it match them as a person, I think is a important role as a parent.
No doubt. And I love this answer from all of you all, right? We all, and Trey, as a business person, what it feels like to potentially be a commodity, right? We know that sometimes we're all cogs in kind of a larger system. It's sad sometimes when we think about it, but it's still the reality. So as we present this, as our children are kind of seen for their talent as opposed to kind of their humanity, how would you address those things now with kind of the benefit of hindsight, with Kenesha Reed, and certainly Trey, as your perspective as a parent and as a leader? Like, what are the types of questions you would ask to identify whether or not the person that's going to lead your program potentially sees the humanity amongst the blessing that you can bring through your skill on that respective court or pool or field?
I can dive in on this one a little bit. So one of the things that we talk to a lot of our kids about, and Kenesha actually hearkened to it a little bit, is that, to be honest, a lot of times the best option is to find the kids on the team and talk to them. I mean, coaches, God love them, and a lot of them are fantastic. A lot of them, like you said, maybe treat kids a little bit more like a commodity, but the reason they're coaches at a high level is because they've learned how to manage that process really well. I mean, most coaches, if you're going to have success in college, you need to be a good recruiter, which in turn means you need to be a good salesperson. Those folks get paid 6 figures every year to do this over and over again with 50 kids or whatever it might be, and they get better every year, and they learn the right things to say, and they learn the right buzzwords to hit with 16 and 17-year-olds and parents and whatever it might be. And you can ask questions, and some folks will be a little more honest, some folks will be a little less honest, but at the end of the day, that coach is trying to win games, set themselves up for success, keep their family in the same city, keep their kids going to the same high school, And so you can't fault them for the process that they take because of the way that we've structured the business really of college athletics. But it's tough to break through that shell with a lot of coaches in that setting, especially, you know, sort of as you tier up and the stakes get higher from a financial perspective, to put it, you know, very top level. But kids are beautifully honest in most situations. If you can get on campus and you can talk to somebody and have a conversation or get away from a coach or go play catch or go walk around on campus or whatever, you know, even if they're not answering the question correctly, they haven't learned how to hide it nearly as well. So you can ask them questions about, you know, hey, do you guys have anybody who's studied abroad on the team? Hey, do you have any business majors on the team? And they'll laugh at it and go, oh, that doesn't line up with practice. That's not a thing. Or, you know, we had some, but they, you know, they transferred because they figured out that way. You know, you'll hear those things as you talk to them. And for us, that's kind of become the secret sauce that we tell our kids. Like, hey, talk to the coaches. You obviously need to make sure that's a good culture fit. That person can, you know, provide the things that you need from what you can glean from a coach in that conversation. But find the kids, man. Talk to the players. Talk to the people that are going through it. Because they're up at 5 a.m. every day, they're practicing, they got a full load of classes. They don't have time to put on a face for you at 3 p.m. whenever they're talking to you. They're just going to get right to it. And it can be so enlightening for you in that process.
Love that. Kanisha, what about you?
Yeah, no, I was saying earlier, like talking to the kids is a really big thing. Some of the things that you can ask them is like, what is the culture like? What are some of the things that you guys do, like, honestly, for fun? Like, that's a big one. If they're not doing anything for fun outside of your sport, you know, culture probably isn't that big of a deal for them. You can also like reach out to the coach for the resources, and then you can talk to the people who are the head of the resources. And then like kind of get a gander of like, you know, how are you helping your sports? Like, how have people from my sport, like, what does that process look like? And, you know, they're not going to lie to you. They got to tell you like from their experience what's happened. Another thing is like the transfer portal is public. Like, if there are a lot of kids going out, it's probably not a good thing. And like, don't be afraid to like ask like the people on the team, like, hey, like, why did like 5 people transfer this year? Like, what's going on? And also like, if you're like coaches like don't react well to some of the questions you've asked, like that's not a good sign. Like when I was looking to go to UCLA, like I remember asking my coach, like, you know, like there are some, like people might think that this isn't the best school for XYZ. Like, what would you say to those people? You know, and like she replied to me very honestly and was like, hey, you know, like we have this people, like we can work on this. You can ask them like, what do you want to work on? What are some of the cultural goals that you might have? And, you know, see what they have. If the answer is like really prepared and it's not specific, probably not a good sign.
Sure.
And you can ask both the coaches that and like the student athletes all of these questions. And if the answers don't line up, you know, that's another thing where it's like, ooh, that's not a good sign. And like as a parent, like I think, like, you know, your kid's job is to have fun on these recruit trips. Like really, I think for kids, like when they're going on these recruit trips, if they're having a good time, if they're fitting in, like that's their job. I think as a parent, as a coach, your job is to be like, okay, like when you're there, just like make sure you ask a couple of these questions, you know, and maybe even after your recruit trip. Because I think if you're having a good time and you're fitting in, like, you know, 9 out of 10 times, like it's a good fit. It's pretty hard to fake that. You can't really fake like feeling that camaraderie with the people around you. And so like that could be a conversation for after. And I think it's important as the adults to like keep the process fun for the kids, because they're, you know, it's already hard. You're already tying some of your identity to your ability on the field, in the pool, you know, on the court, wherever. And so those rare moments where you can enjoy having, you know, like people, colleges wanting you and having fun and like getting all these people being like, please come to my school, you know, that is like a great thing. And we want the kids to really love that.
No doubt. Yeah. And even your thought kind of triggered, you know, part of my own experience where, you know, when we had recruits on campus and I love my school and go Buffs and all of that, But certainly we didn't have any 6 a.m. practices when we had recruits on campus. Like that somehow that didn't align. So again, it doesn't mean that weekend didn't happen or those connections to those teammates didn't happen, but it also knows that you are, kind of you're at a ball, and at some point, things do turn back into pumpkins, and that just be sober about that, I guess, when making the decision versus somehow every single weekend is going to be as lit as it was during my recruiting time there. It's not the reality. I don't care where you go. Trey, your thoughts around just kind of that process and making sure that environment is what it's supposed to be.
Well, something was just said that I thought was really brilliant, and I didn't actually. I recognized it with my oldest, and we weren't even doing like he wasn't going to be an athlete, but your kids will get a gut feel if they're a fit. Like we would walk on a campus, and it would be like we like 5 minutes into the campus, and I don't know where it comes from. He'd be like, "Okay, now yeah, it's he was just I could tell he was hesitant." And then we walk on a different campus, and he'd be leaning in and listening, and like you can just sometimes if your child spends enough time around other people, they realize, is this my tribe or not? Right? There's just some visceral kind of thing, and so I wouldn't discount that kind of watch those nonverbal cues. Your kids, you're knowing if they're leaning in or leaning out, if they're want more, if they're looking for an excuse to leave. And so I think there's something into that idea of your kids, you see them in enough environments. Are they comfortable? Because that may be a good sign that this feels a little bit more like home than somewhere else.
Here's a question before we kind of move into the mental health space about our conversation. So, and this is a personal question, and it varies depending upon someone's reality, but what would be the answer that you guys would have around this question of balancing wanting to play more, right, in an environment or a situation to where you're going to be, activated pretty quickly versus maybe you don't play at all, maybe throughout your entire environment or experience, but after college, this sets you up for success, whatever that means. Once you have to hang them up, like, how do you manage that conversation? Because we know it can't be 50-50. You've got to pick 51% of one of those topics, right? Either playing and being part of that thing, or this is going to help you in your career down the road, or maybe even help you develop as a person. So anybody wants to jump in on that one?
Speaking from an advising standpoint, I mean, to your point, we try as much as we can to get as close to 50-50 as we can on that. You always want to have a balance as being a student, being an athlete, having those experiences. But I think a lot of it, not to be the cop-out answer, but does sort of stem from your, that person's personal preference on what is going to make their college experience a positive one. I think that having, in certain cases, having a much heavier impact, having heavier influence on the athletic side gives you the motivation that you need to push forward on the internship side, on the academic side, on the post-playing career side. I think we try to make it very clear to the kids that we talk to, hey, this decision is your springboard to the next 40 years, not just the next 4. So I get you're 16, 17 years old. It's hard to conceptualize that space. Look at the people in your life, that you look up to and just in the world. And even if it is an athlete, I mean, especially nowadays with athletes, they're getting into business ventures. They're getting into different, they're diversifying their portfolio, for lack of a better term, in a lot of different places, and helping those kids understand that, this is really important right now. And this is huge, but you've got to make a decision that's going to allow you to grow beyond this sport whenever it decides to end. So we try really hard to sort of bring our kids back to center as much as possible on that. But I do think it stems from a lot of intrinsic motivation on the kids. If you need those sports, my cousin was something like that. He wasn't going to go to college, and then he had an opportunity to play hockey at a college, and he was going to get good playing time. And now he is in the process of getting a PhD. I mean, that's the intrinsic motivation he needed to get to class and to do the things he needed to do in order to continue that process. And he grew into what has become sort of his springboard in the next phase of life. So I think that is huge.
Case in point about what we talked about, it being a unique thing, right? You turn that question on its head. Just because someone's leading in on the playing part doesn't mean actually they're benefiting long term from that experience. So,
Mhm.
Kanisha, thoughts on kind of how that plays out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, I think the biggest thing is like having a little bit of faith in yourself if you're the student athlete and your kid, and just knowing that like things will be okay. You know, like, I mean, in talking to Reed when we were talking about our stories, like I can tell that we were both in a moment we were like, oh crap, like, you know, what is my future? Like, do I have anything after this sport? And like I could see it, even though we were on Zoom, I was like, I know that you felt that and I felt that too. Going into college, legitimately, like major right over my head, wasn't even thinking about like a job after college. And one thing was like a lot of people in my life were pushing me like, you need to figure this out, like you need to go to a school with the plan. And like after college, like having had that experience, like the amount of people I know who went into college with an idea of what they wanted to do and came out exactly doing that thing is very few and far between. It's very rare. And like power to those kids who know exactly what they want to do, because that's already, you know, you've got a leg up in your life, but you shouldn't put that pressure on yourself or on your kids to be like, you know, like know exactly what you want to do. I like every college has value, every college has amazing opportunities. And like even if that isn't there, you can always transfer. So like, and you know, obviously that's not what you want to do going in, but I think like having a general idea in my mind is good enough. That's more than I had going in, and I am fortunate enough to say that like I ended up being completely fine. So like I would say like just having a little bit of faith in knowing that you're going to be okay, so long as you have, you know, the motivation, like the drive and the want for these things, then I think like you're going to be okay. You're going to figure it out eventually. And I think something that the people around me had struggled with was like letting me fall, you know, like I guess they weren't, and myself included, like I wasn't used to like failing. I wasn't used to like not knowing everything. As an athlete is planned out, you know, everything that you're doing from the minute you wake up to like sometimes a year in advance, like you know your schedule. So it is scary to like let yourself fall, to let yourself just like go in blind. And that was something that I just really wish that I had, was like just people giving me grace to know like no matter what I did, like they knew that I could do it, because at the time I didn't feel like I could. And I got a lot of slack from my major. Um, and it didn't help, you know, it just stressed me out. So I think that's just something important to know, like going in, like have a general idea, you know, hopefully keep in mind like school is very important, and you know it, but also it's not always going to go the way you plan, and that's a good thing actually.
No question. No question. Trey.
So the one thing we say around here is you can't produce spark, right? As a parent, you can fan a flame, right? And you can do everything you do, but there's got to be some internal drive, some internal motivation. And so to your question, I would say, where's my son's spark? What is it that's getting him? Is it the school side because he's really got this idea that he wants to graduate from here and get this degree or do that, or is it he really wants to play and to Reed's point, that's going to pull him through to school? And so I think to me, it is a parent, it's just helping understand which side of the ledger that child's playing on, and fanning it and putting them in an environment where that's going to motivate the other side. Because ultimately we want them to graduate, right? We want them to be set up for the next 40 years, as Reed said. But how they get there, what gives them the drive to succeed is going to be their own individual personality. And I think as a parent and an advisor, our job is to, like I said, fan the flame.
Yes, I would agree. So moving into the mental health space, and I will actually preface this by kind of one of the questions that we got. One of the comments was made, I forget who made it, but we talked about how 25% or some 30% of what you do is actually your sport. Now, I don't know, like I think it depends on what college you're at, depends on what sport you're playing, depends on what program you're in. But I would say that even if it is 25%, it's probably the other 75 is influencing that 25, right? Like while you're sleeping or while you're at a party or while you're at lunch, you're thinking about whatever that 25% is, right? So even when you're not doing it, it infiltrates your mind and your space. But as we Reed, and specifically Kenesha, when you talk about like mental health services, what have you seen on certain campuses, or the types of offerings, the types of tools are being offered to kids now that have not been historically?
Yeah, for me, like I feel like I came at an interesting junction where things were kind of being fleshed out. And now that I've left, there's actually a lot more resources than there were before. Like we actually have somebody who's dedicated to like mental health of student athletes and like checking in and making sure like they get what they need, whereas we didn't have that before. For me, like we had like a very like I think a lot of times like schools are very interested in like the physical aspects. So like we have all of the best like physical therapy things. We had like a treadmill that was like anti-gravity that you could run in. Like it's crazy to me. Like they have all of the best things. And so going into college, the mental health aspect, I think we only had just like a mental health service that we had a hotline that was 24/7. And then I think we had like therapy services. And one thing which is good and bad is like for student athletes, like you were able to like, because there would be a long line, you know, college is stressful for those therapy sessions, but like if you're a student athlete, you could get there pretty quick, which is like good and bad, you know, depending on who you are. But that was kind of some of the things that, at least those are the things that I was made aware of. Maybe we had more, but I didn't know. When I left, now we have that person who is dedicated to it. And unfortunately, like we've like, I don't know if you guys are aware, but there have been like 2 suicides from student athletes in the last couple of months. And it is heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And it's not the first I've heard of it. So it's sad that those are the things that are having to come up for people to start taking it seriously. But like from now we have more things dedicated to it. And I was also part of a club at my school that was started by a student athlete called Sam's Club. Kind of funny name. It doesn't have to do with the store. It's Student Athlete Mental Health Club. And so like we would put on events, you know, like stress events specifically during like finals and stuff. And like that was a great thing for people who have struggled with mental health as a student athlete to, you know, pour in and give back. And also like it's a testament to like my school, because I thought it was super cool that you could just start a club. And other people since I've left have started more and more clubs. Like I think we have a diversity club now. So that's another thing. Like if you're really passionate about it, and even going into school, like you can talk to the people, the advisors, and be like, hey, is it like do you guys have clubs? And if you don't, like, can I start one? So yeah, that's my experience.
Love it. Reed.
It's super cool to hear kind of where Kenesha was as far as the resources that were available to her when she was going to school. I started my college baseball career almost 10 years ago now, which sounds really weird to say out loud. But to give you an idea of kind of where it's come from there, I needed to get some mental health services between my fall and spring semester, my freshman year, and was prescribed Lexapro for depression, and didn't have a resource to do it at Texas Tech University at the time. And then everyone on my team found out that I had depression because my trainer pulled the bottle out and turned around like this in the training office and was like, "What's Lexapro for, Reed?" And so then I got to explain to everybody that I was working through that. So that is kind of where it was. I go now and visit schools as a independent college counselor as part of what we do at Athletes to Athletes, and it's amazing how much that mental health aspect has become such a key part of the conversation for resources, both for the student body and for student athletes. I think as resources allow in different programs, mental health assistance for student athletes specifically, and just for the general population has increased dramatically, especially through the pandemic years. I think it highlighted a lot of that. I know I think there's the most recent study I can think of, student athletes, like on an anonymous survey, 65% of student athletes said that they felt depression or some level of, extreme stress that they couldn't shake in their daily operation, but only about 10% of them actually go and seek mental health services. And I think a lot of that can stem from the stigmatization, especially on an athlete level, that, hey, we're supposed to push through things. We're supposed to be mentally tough. We're supposed to, there's power in being able to manage that or being able to wear that and still do things. And I think we just need to sort of, as athletes and as that community, sort of grow with this reality that that's not real. I mean, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. And I think schools are finally starting to buy into that more and more. And so that's encouraging to see, but yeah, it has came a long way in a very short amount of time. It feels like we've really learned to sort of validate those struggles that teenagers in general have, college kids have. I mean, everybody has, but and student athletes, it feels like really specifically deal with, just given what their lifestyle is in college.
Without question. And I think it's even it challenges all of us to think about, like, what are the top of the top? What are those folks doing? And those folks, even if they haven't been prescribed anything, are actively engaging in mental health because they know that that helps their existence as an athlete, right? Like, this is a proactive, I can get better, I can get past the mistake, I can make sure I'm not dwelling on these things. Here's how I can block out what's happening off the court or all out of the pool and help me become, present. Like, all of those things don't require that you have a quote unquote diagnosed issue that you're working through. It's just something that you should be able to, it would be silly if you say, well, I don't really want to lift weights, it's just kind of not my thing. That wouldn't be an acceptable answer on a college campus, right? But we allow people to say, well, you know what, I just making sure that I'm thinking about myself in a kind way isn't really my thing. So I'm just going to choose not to do that, right? Like, that doesn't sound like a right answer. So hopefully there's more people that are leading that advance it that way versus what's wrong with you, how do we fix you type of thing, versus how do we make sure that you're the best version of yourself and you're getting out of your own way and you're helping other people. And that's all part of kind of how you approach life, right? Which maybe somebody can help you do that in a healthier way. Trey, your thoughts on just kind of how that the mental health space is needed in that collegiate competition space.
I'm not an expert in this area. I default to my panelists. They've been in this and they know it better. I do agree with what you all said, though, that this is an important part of all of us and needs something that needs to be taken serious. But I 100% default to my panelists on this one.
And respect that, right? Sometimes you don't need to answer the question. I think that's a good thing too, right? Like, we don't always have, there's always not something to be said. But as we kind of bring this conversation to a close, I wanted to lastly, Reed, if you don't mind, kind of, if you were in an elevator, right? You got 30 seconds with, someone that clearly is an athlete, and they're saying, oh, what do you do? And they get it. What do you present to them as them for them to kind of get at least to a space to where they're receptive to some of this support in their process?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think a lot of what we do is we try to, you want athletes to see what can I do to allow my sport to build me into the person who I want to be. I think for the longest time we think about, what can we do to mold into this sport that we want to play, and we spend so much time doing that and so much time trying to fit into what the expectation of success is in the sport that we have. I encourage them to sort of flip it on their head and say, okay, you've worked this hard, you've done all these things. Now, what can sports do for you? How can you use that to motivate you or propel you into the next phase of your life, whether it involves your sport or doesn't? Because you're going to pick up so many soft skills. You're going to pick up a level of motivation that a lot of other people don't have. You're going to pick up opportunities to network and meet and connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to meet feasibly, compete at different levels and different institutions that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have been able to attend without the help of school. How can you've worked so hard to make this thing be a part of your life? How can you then use that to benefit the next 40 years of your life? And then I think, encouraging kids to think about it in that respect helps a lot in situations.
No doubt. Yeah. Any healthy relationship requires reciprocity. That's giving and receiving. And if it's just one-sided, I don't care what you're talking about, it's probably not long for, or certainly not the healthiest space. But I want to thank our esteemed panel and their willingness to be vulnerable and have this conversation about their own perspective and what they've experienced, with who they seek to serve. In Trey's situation, what he's seeking to support with respect to his kids, and also the fluidity to that, right? Like, none of this stuff is final, and it's important for us to continue, to seek more information, to challenge ourselves, ask more questions. I was enthused again by Trey's approach to his children, where it's really easy to tell people what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it. And even if they got the same answer that you do, them finding themselves to that answer is a gift, and I appreciate that. Kenesha, thank you for your willingness to kind of be vulnerable around that experience, and even your social sensitivities, and firing off whenever you're thinking about which school you are going to tell the people you're going to, and how that made you feel, right? And how that's part of that process. And certainly grateful for you even creating Athletes to Athletes, or co-creating that, co-establishing that, and we're grateful for you, and certainly through Positive Coaching Alliance, it's our hope that more people know more information about what they're doing, and so these spaces that have benefited us all continue to do that, and maybe they can improve. So we can, our kids can get out of it what maybe we didn't, or maybe get out of it in a better way. So we're grateful for each of you, and we can't wait to the next conversation. But again, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise,
All right,
Trey,
see
it
y'all
was a
next time.
blast. Thank you.
All right, see y'all. Bye-bye.